is Behind the Games from newoverlords.com, where we seek creators of all kinds to find out what's behind our favorite games. With your hosts, Jeff and Seema.
This is New Overlords Behind the Games podcast. From our Midwest studio, I'm Jeff Lamek.
And from our Northeast studio, I'm Seema.
Today we have David Evans, founder of the indie game studio called Festive Vector. David has recently released a great game we'll talk all about called Sail Forth. David, hello.
Hi.
I know it was strange for you to hear me call you the founder of the indie game studio, since this is your first game you're coming out with, but it's an amazing game. We'll talk all about it. I'm quite excited to do that. And it's great to get back with you and talk to you again. We talked at PAX West, right?
Yeah. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we met at PAX West. I came by your booth a couple times, and we featured it in our top 10 studios to watch from PAX West a few months ago. It was a great booth because you had the boat, and I'll show some pictures of it if people can see the video. It was a great booth. You did an amazing job setting that up. It was really eye-catching. It was also really centrally located, which I thought was really good.
Yeah, we really lucked out with the placement of the booth there.
Yeah, excellent. So I do want to talk a little bit about that. I want to talk about your Microsoft connections. So we'll definitely get into that as well. You were after I worked there, but we'll talk about that. And just so everybody has a heads up and they can get their notepads out, we'll talk a bit about your philosophy on game development and the toy at the core of great games, which I think is really amazing. But
yeah, sounds great.
To kick it off and get everybody excited and get a look at what you've got releasing that just released, why don't you describe Sail Forth, what it is? We'll show some clips in the video because it is very cool.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Sail Forth is I guess it's a sailing adventure game. That's usually how I describe it now. It has a little bit of procedural elements to it, but really like what it's about is, sailing a boat out on the ocean, coming across like a bunch of fun little characters that have like different things for you to help them out with. And while you're doing that, you kind of like uncover like sort of a deeper mystery of the ocean and try to essentially bring prosperity and peace back to the deep blue. And one of the main things about it that I tried to focus on is having a sort of more realistic approach to the sailing mechanics. So there's a lot more to think about a little bit than when you're controlling your boat and steering it against the wind and that kind of thing. Right.
And it is relatively realistic. I grew up sailing, which I know you did, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But it is relatively realistic as you cut in close to the wind and you pull your sails in tight, and it's relatively simple controls, but it's deceivingly simple. But that's kind of the way a sailboat works. On a sailboat, you have a rudder, you have a sail, you could let up the sail more or less. It's almost always up, and you're either pulling it in or letting it out. But as you turn in tight to the wind, I mean, it's very complicated if you want to look at the science and the fluid dynamics and the aerodynamics of the sail that turns into a wing and blah 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 blah. But you're either just like pulling it in or letting it out, and you're cutting the rudder so that you're at a different angle to the wind that's more optimal for where you want to go.
Yeah, exactly.
And you've got all that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. At least the high level of it. Like,
right.
Some people I remember would ask me like, "Oh, so like, do you simulate like the way that like the foresail affects like the flow of the wind to the sails behind it and stuff like that?" And I was like, no, that's a little too much. But it's the basic principles of sailing, I think, are decently represented in it.
Now there are multiple boats. There was double-masted, single-masted, double-masted. So you're not going to be simulating the physics again. It's not going to be calculating fluid dynamics on the fly. Are there like spinnakers? I didn't get far enough where I was like...
No spinnakers. There's like, square-masted rigs. There's fore and aft. And they're all essentially approximate the physics for it. They're approximated via like, I found some sort of like simple equations online that someone had worked out for like sort of approximating what the forces are on a single sail. And I just kind of extrapolated that and tweaked it a bit.
So that's at the core of the game. And then you turned it into this adventure. And so very early on, you get weapons, you get cannons, and you need to use those from time to time. And
Yeah, because if you're going to be sailing around, like at some point you're going to want to, I don't know, you want to have, people are just going to expect to have a cannon. It's fun. It's a fun little thing to do to like try and hit targets and stuff while
and
you're sailing.
discover what you can sort of like hit, and because you're getting some resources, you're sort of collecting resources as you go along. You're collecting a little bit of currency so you can buy new boats. You're collecting a little bit of a crew. You're trying to clear out, different ports that maybe a little, these little pirates have taken over, which are really fun. It's kind of a water world, right? There's no giant continents that I
Yeah.
saw.
Yeah, it's kind of unclear, I guess, in the game leaves it a little bit as a, I don't know, a mystery, or like a just sort of like vague sort of backstory of like something has happened to this world, or like maybe it was just always like it. But you get some kind of, you do get little clues that like the world wasn't always like this, and some kind of like big event happened long ago. And yeah, just you get the sense that maybe like the world wasn't always just completely covered in ocean.
That said, it's a fun, brightly colored, fun
Yeah.
characters, almost like little bobblehead characters. So it's not,
Mhm.
we're not getting into some like dark, dark undertones of the destruction post-apocalyptic world. You must sail for
Exactly.
your life. that'll be the sequel. You
Right.
could
Yeah.
do it in
The gritty
Unreal
reboot.
5, with pirates coming to kill you, and make it a horror game then. But no, so it's I was playing it on my Steam Deck, and it works really well there. And I think it's the perfect kind of game for something like the Steam Deck, because it's colorful, it's bright, it's larger elements, it's relatively simple controls, but then it's a deep adventure. There's a lot to do, and a lot more than like when I went and talked to you at PAX West and was sort of like understanding the core of the game. When it launched, there was so much more than I had expected, and so much more of
Yeah.
a sort of like a story and adventure and depth, and you end up getting into like kind of like boss battles and some big things sort of happening there. I haven't gotten too deep into the story, so the non-spoiler hints that you have that you're like uncovering the secrets of the ocean, that sounds really cool too. But you developed this almost all yourself. You did get a little help on story and narrative, right? Yeah, why don't you describe that? Describe how you kicked it off, what the core was, and then the added on pieces of like
Sure.
story.
Yeah. So what I can do maybe is just kind of give like a high level like overview of the process, like
Yeah.
when people came on and stuff like that. So I started out making just this little prototype that was like a sailing prototype, and I just wanted to kind of mess around with sailing physics and stuff like that, and see what I could come up with. And so I was working on that, and I'd been working on a bunch of different prototypes, so I didn't really see this one as like something that would go anywhere else. Like I was just like, this is one of the prototypes. And something about it, like it kind of like drew me in, so I just kept working on it. And like a year went by, and I was still working on it, and I was just kind of adding stuff willy nilly. I was like, maybe it'd be fun to add like like some pirates to shoot at, and maybe it'd be fun to like have this and have that. Like, let me add some more like wildlife swimming around. And let's add, oh, maybe now that there's wildlife, maybe you have a camera and you can take pictures of them. That would be fun. And so, kind of just like piecemeal development, like adding thing after thing. And eventually it got to the point where I realized, okay, I probably have to release this now. Like this is too much. I've put too much time in this now to just let it fall to the side. And so I started working towards that. And what I decided, that was, I think, in 2019 or something like that, having started it in 2016. And I'm doing this all part-time, by the way. And I decided, okay, so I think what I'll do is just kind of take this year and finish up, just kind of get it to the finish line and release whatever I have at the end of the year. And around that time, I met this friend of mine who has just recently started doing indie game publishing. And
Okay.
he saw my game and he liked it, and he asked me like, so what do you like, do you have a plan to release this on consoles? Which I definitely didn't. I just barely knew how to get things on Steam. And so I thought that sounded cool, and I was like, yeah, let's do it. And so we like worked out a deal, and like he started helping me bring it to consoles and like do all the porting work for it, and like kind of get in touch with like some more marketing resources and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like the first big addition to the team, where like now he and his team are handling these ports, and he has all this marketing power behind him.
Which is a ton. So I was just looking at your page. You're released on Steam, but also on Switch, on PlayStation, on Xbox, Steam Store, and the Epic Game Store.
Yeah.
So
And both for PlayStation, Xbox, like it's both Series X, S,
oh yeah, all the
PS5,
versions.
PS4.
It plays great with a
Yeah.
controller. I mean, that alone, I'm surprised. Well, the help would be infinitely critical to me ever even thinking about something like that, because I can envision creating a game. I know what some of those elements and parts are, but getting it to all those platforms, that had to be
It's
huge. And I'm
it's so
surprised
much
it only
work.
took, it didn't take like 10 years.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's even more work than you think, because you think about like when you first think about porting a game to another platform like the PS5 or something, you think like, oh, like you have to make the controller work, and you have to like work with, at the low level, however their graphics works and things like that. You have to make that work. You have to make sure it runs on it well. But then there's this whole other class of work that's like the invisible work of like you have to make a store page on there, and you have to like produce marketing assets to their specifications, and every single platform has like a different pixel dimension of like the header page or whatever that you need to show, and like different
Yeah.
requirements for the screenshots, and like you have to localize the store page on every storefront, and you have to there's so many things, and like the achievement system for every single one is different, and they have all different requirements. Like, there's this weird dance you have to do with, like, Xbox
Right.
and
The
PlayStation
certifications and
achievements
yeah.
where, like, they have almost conflicting, requirements. It's yeah, it's quite
And
astonishing how
and to
much.
do that for all of them,
Yeah,
that I'm very impressed you got it out there. But that's got to feel good to have it out there on all those platforms too.
it's really cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's certainly the biggest project I've ever worked on. It's a cool feeling. It's
Now
kind of mind-blowing.
let's back it up one notch, because one of the things I really loved hearing you talk about, and we'll even back up further later. We'll talk about Microsoft and what you did before, but before we sort of get off of the game too far, you just described it. You started developing this little prototype,
Mhm.
and one of the things that you and I were talking about, and Seema in the prep, was this idea of your philosophy for what it is at the core of a game, and why you were sort of like playing with this thing, with the core of the sailing thing. I know there was a couple elements that why you picked sailing for one, but then the thing you were making for the other. So why don't you talk about why you picked sailing for one? Because
Yeah,
that's a fun
so
backstory.
there's a few reasons. One of the reasons is just that I like sailing in games. I think like games that have sailing in it have always it's there's something that's very appealing about it to me. I think it's like it feels like this kind of freedom where you can like jump on a boat and like go off
Yeah.
somewhere. It's like
It,
a cool feeling.
until you just said that just now, I didn't realize that to such a degree. But there aren't a ton of games that have a whole lot of sailing or open water adventure as part of them. But when they do, it does seem to like open up the world so much more. You know,
Yeah.
being able to like get a boat, and that's your boat. I love this in space games when you get your own spaceship. And you get your spaceship, especially if you can like walk around in the spaceship. So you have your boat. It's a thing, and then you go out and it's it seems so much bigger. The ocean, the sailing seems so much bigger of an open world than just a land based open world for some reason in my mind.
I guess I don't know. It's like the way that we as humans have always like made huge discoveries is like by venturing out to sea and like finding whole new parts of the world that we didn't know about before. Like I
Right.
think that maybe has something to do with it. It's like this, yeah, like this is how you find new stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, like that was kind of one of the main driving things, and another part of it was that I grew up doing a good bit of sailing with my dad, he was kind of like an avid sailor. When I was growing up, he had a little like I think it was a 22-footer sailboat or something like that. He would take me and my brother out on the lake, and we would just like go out there, sail around a bit, like have some canned beans or something like on the little stove there, and it was fun. And so, but I never really like became a big sailor myself. So like, there's always kind of this thing where it's like my dad would always try to get me to get more interested in it, and it
Yep.
never quite stuck with me, even though like I was saying, like I enjoyed it in games and stuff. But and so when I was looking around for these prototypes to make, one of the things that appealed to me about this idea is just that this would be a fun way to like kind of bond with him and like share something with him. He's not like a big gamer and I'm not a big sailor, but like in this combination of the two things, like there could be some fun back and forth with him, and like I could
Yeah.
try the game
And
and like
did
give me
it work
feedback.
out that way? Did he have fun with the game?
He enjoyed, I mean, I think he doesn't particularly care about like the game part of the game, but like as far as like it enables him to like, be out on the ocean, and like he said, like, it feels like you're on a boat. Like it feels like you're out there, and like the
Yes,
way
the
that
ultimate
the
from your
boat
dad.
reacts to the
Yeah.
waves and everything. Like that part was pretty appealing to him.
Which
Uh,
is the core that you were working on for so long and that feel you were going for. So
yeah,
that's got to be great validation to have a sailor tell you that.
yeah,
Uh,
it,
and
yeah. He's one of the best play testers. Yeah,
I love that backstory. I grew up sort of the same way. My parents had boats growing up. It started as a little speedboat, and then they got into sailboats about when I was in junior high-ish. And my dad was a sailor. Both of them would go out and sail. In fact, they ended up getting a bigger one, like a 38-foot on the Great Lakes, and they would do lake crossings. And my sister and I we'd go out there, but it was like their thing, and it was like my dad's thing. My dad was the captain, and blah blah blah. He even like got into pseudo race. It was like little yacht club races, quote unquote yacht club. But he had a sort of like a pleasure boat. It wasn't a race boat, but he would go and
right.
race it, and he would try to teach me or get me into it. I never really got into it as much, I think, as he would want it. And this would have been a great project to sort of do in that way, connect
Yeah.
the technology to that hobby. And I did a little bit of that with him back in the day too, of the tech that he would have on the boat. That would be something
Mm,
that I would get into. But then, yeah, to have your dad test it out and be part of the play test and be able to say, yeah, this is kind of how it works, and it feels like it's going to work. I think that gets to a couple things. I think that's really exciting to have that connection. That anytime you can get your family, any of your family involved. I love when get my kids involved in the computer stuff that I'm into, the tech and the games, and parents and family and everybody. We'll talk about it in a second. HoloLens. I used to bring the HoloLens home on to big holidays and have the aunts and uncles put it on and
yeah.
and see stuff. Uh, the other thing that I think is really interesting is it's great also because that core of the sailing and the boat working, that was the core of what you developed first, right?
Hmm.
So why don't you talk about that for a second? Because I thought that was fascinating when you started to talk about your philosophy of what you were trying to do there and why that was interesting to you.
Yeah. The way that I like to make games, and this is sort of something that I realized while I was working at Microsoft, but like what I like working on is basically when the user provides some input to the game, or to the software, like the program does something to reward them in return. So like whatever they pressed a button, and like something happens on the screen that makes you happy that you pressed the button. Like it's not just acknowledging that you did it. It reacts to it with like, confetti, and like it's cool. Like it makes you feel good, and you're glad you pressed the button. And so I kind of like think of the core of games as toys. And so like I started with this prototype as trying to make this toy that is the boat, and I wanted to just basically make the toy as fun to play with as possible. So like all the little pieces on the boat move and like react to your input. Like there's a little helm on each boat, or a tiller if they're a small enough boat. And it actually moves and stuff as you're steering the boat, like a little model sailboat. And like you can see the sails raise, and they have little rigging lines, and it feels like a really like detailed toy that has these like nice reactions to what you're doing. And so then what I think about is once you have this toy that's like fun to play with, and it's important that it's fun to play with because it's not fun to play with, you don't really have like a firm foundation to build upon.
Right. Which I think is huge.
Yeah.
So a couple things in there that it reminded me of. Just the starting point of user-centric and user experience. Those are big in corporate design, and they're thrown around a lot, but they're not really articulated in this sort of raw way as much in as you can sort of think of in games, which is you want to put, especially in a game, it happens much less often in business software, but you want to put the user at the center of what you're creating because it's getting a job done for a user. And in the case of games, it's allowing the user to have fun. So if the game is off like doing things and your interaction, your experience, your tactile impact on the world is limited or it's sloppy or it doesn't feel good, you'll hear people complain about this all the time about the controls just don't feel good.
Yeah.
Then it's bad for the user. It's bad.
Yeah.
It's bad user experience, which
Absolutely.
so you could say user centric, but this is really sort of the core, which was what you're describing. The other thing that it made me think of when you started talking about this was having that core toy, that core thing that you're doing feel really, really good is maybe accidentally, but it's part of every great game. And unless it's there, again, you get that kind of feedback that, hey, you made this amazing world, but the core thing that I'm trying to do, it just doesn't feel good, and I'm not getting. Yeah, I get that there's these cinematic movies and stories playing out around me, but when I try to tame the dinosaur, it doesn't feel good.
Exactly.
It's like not working for me, so I don't get what's going on there.
And it's bad for the game too because the game needs you, the player, in order to survive. Like in order to like be able to show the cool things about the game, it needs the player to like continue, engaging with it and interacting with it. And I think that the only way, or at least the best way to like ensure that is to like make sure that the player's motivated to keep doing that. Like
Yeah.
anytime that the player is doing things that the game needs in order to keep going, you have to reward the player for doing those things. So they want to keep interacting with you.
Right. Moment to moment, not just like the major meta rewards.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes a ton
moment
of
to
sense.
moment. Like, yeah, when you were talking about this before, it made me think of other games I play where there's thousands of clicks for everything you do. And I get click fatigue. Even though it's not like a huge physical effort. It's just you get tired of it.
Yeah.
And I don't feel rewarded for it. So I like this concept.
Yeah, that's precisely it, I think.
Yeah. I think of some of my favorite games, like a really good example of this I think is V Rising. And we talked to Stunlock Studios about V Rising. They have this cool survival game. It's cool. The theme is really good. It's vampires, and there's a mechanic of the sunlight and the night. But the very core of their game is something they've developed over many years, which is sort of the fighting and the fight mechanics, and of you either like fighting creatures, or in the case where you want to do PvP on a PvP server, fighting the other players. They developed that core toy of the way the animation and the way your character moves and the way the abilities sort of synergize and fit together. They developed that over many, many years in other games and brought it into this game. And it makes the game feel really good at the core.
Exactly, yeah. Like one of the things in that game is the shade mechanic, which I found really engaging because I thought it felt really good to like run out and then day happens and then you're like darting between the shadows of trees and stuff like that.
Right.
And that's one of those things where if the movement didn't feel good, that would be a really frustrating mechanic where you just feel like, oh, I just like the character didn't do what I wanted and I got left out in the sun and then I died. But like because of it feels
I was
so
out
good.
of that. I wasn't standing in that circle, or I wasn't out in the sun. All right. Yeah, exactly. And for being a live service game, it does feel really good. It feels really in sync. you do dodge from shadow to shadow in the daytime, and you feel it, and you
Yeah.
like it. We talked in that one about how I do or don't like day and night in games. And that one, I like it because it feels really good and it feels like it matters and it is
Mhm.
part of the gameplay. And you can also see at night. I hate it when you can't see at night. Um, so I love that idea of the toy at the core of the game. I think of that as a great game philosophy and also a great way to, work and refine and make sure you've got a thing at the core that works really well to make the game great.
Yeah.
I think there are other storytellers out there that can tell a great story and audiences that just want the story. But even there, you're going to get in trouble. And I think some games that I really think are amazing, like the Horizon series. The Horizon series, I think, is brilliant from a storytelling and a cinematics perspective, but it does sort of get pushed to the side a little bit because, especially because they keep releasing when other great games that both have sort of like the cinematic world
Mhm.
and amazing gameplay come out, and their core toy of, hey, I'm gonna fight, fight doesn't hold up against like Elden Ring. When
Right.
Forbidden West releases and Elden Ring releases at the same time, I think Horizon Zero Dawn is a better story and better cinematics than Elden Ring. Elden Ring has this cool, inscrutable story,
Yeah. That's very vague.
but the core toy of the gameplay fight mechanics is what the people who love Elden Ring love.
Yep. Yeah.
And there's some of that in Horizon Zero Dawn, and they're refining it. And I think it's getting better and better. But it's not. It doesn't feel as good as it could. If you're someone who wants to experience the story, then then it's still a brilliant series, and I hope it gets really big as a result.
I think that there's that you're making me think about like there's the kind of like two different. I guess I don't really want to say two different types of designers. That sounds very binary, but like there are two different ways that you can look at. I've seen a lot. I've seen two different ways that people tend to approach game design, I guess. And like one of them is I hear this a lot. Like someone will tell you like, "Oh, I have this idea for a game," and you're like, "What's okay? Cool. Like, what's the idea?" And then they'll say something like, "Okay, you're a forgotten prince who's been like cast away from their old kingdom and blah blah blah," and you're like, "Okay, okay, so that's the story, but what's the game?"
Right.
Uh, and that like some people approach this from like a very story first thing, which I don't think is bad, but like it's a very different way than I think about things. And I think that you need both. You can't have
Yeah.
just one. So like in the case of Sailforth, for example, I had the toy, and the toy was
Hmm.
pretty good, but I didn't really have that part. I didn't have this sort of thing to like because you can give someone a toy and they'll have fun with it for a while, but like if it's just a toy, then you don't have the staying power. You need a game to
Right.
play with the toy. You need a reason to keep playing it once you like explore
Right.
all the parts and see what the cool things that the toy can do are.
Yeah.
You need some reason to like some kind of goal to
Right.
accomplish with the toy.
Unless it's supposed to be, like a little 5-10 minute thing, and that maybe you play like 5 minutes a day. There are
Right.
those kinds of like Vampire Survivors is
Exactly. Yeah.
is and that kind of game is great. But then you really got to lean into just the toy. It's just a toy, and then people set it aside really quick, which is
Hmm.
fine. Also, I mean that game blew up. It got really big. Everybody loved playing it. Play Vampire Survivors. There's a little bit of progression that can be part of like the game around it, the
Yep.
adventure to progress. But of all the people that I know that were just wild about Vampire Survivors, they're not like still exploring and going on adventures. And no, you
You're
you
right.
play, you
Yeah.
play it, you beat it, and you're done.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so having that core game that's solid, and then the narrative and world that wraps around it, that's really exciting to me and makes kind of a place that you want to come back to and you think about, and you go to sleep at night and lay in bed going, I wonder what if I sailed west, and if
Hmm.
I haven't unlocked this area, and I just want to see what's there.
Yeah. Yeah.
you have two people listed on your page for writing and narrative, Jeff Sparks and Don Thacker. So did you like, how did you connect with them, and how did you like bring in the narrative part? I mean, did you call them up and say, you got to write a story for I mean, how did
this
you do
was
that?
hard. This is complicated because I've never done something like this. Like, I've only really ever worked on games with, I never really worked on a game with like a big story. I've worked on just kind of smaller scoped games, and if they had any kind of story, like me or like other devs on the team just kind of threw in stuff. Like, I've never worked with a professional writer. And so basically we got to the point where in the development where we felt like, okay, like we need some kind of narrative. Like, I'm kind of at a loss as to like how to make this like a compelling experience narratively. And so Ty, who's the publisher that I was working with, he had connection to this writer, Don Thacker, who'd done work on like a lot of stuff. He works on like Devolver, the Devolver digital directs.
Yep.
And he's got like a really fun, zany style, and we thought that could be like a fun.
Devolver has some crazy
exactly,
stuff.
yeah.
Nobody's worked on any of that Devolver stuff. That's
yeah. So it seemed like it could be a good fit because it could be like a fun, weird world or something. At this point, we had no idea what the world was going to be. Like, I had really just the game and nothing. And so we brought him on, and what we told him initially was just that, I had like this kind of loose game structure where there were some bosses. They were all just like boats that you would fight. And I was thinking like, okay, like we basically just need some dialogue for each of these bosses that you'll fight, and like maybe some like few narrative breadcrumbs in between. And so we like kind of give him this pitch, and he's like interested. And so he like says, all right, I'll come back with some stuff next week or 2 weeks from now or something. And so he comes back and he's like, okay, so I've made this calendar system for the game where here's like the days of the week in this world, and here's like all this backstory, and we're like, oh, okay,
wow.
What about the boss? Like, and he's like, no, we'll get to that, but like this stuff is important. Like, we need to build a world first.
Interesting.
And that was where I was kind of like realizing like, okay, like, yeah, we can make like more of an interesting like world than just it. I realized that having a writer just kind of like fill in the blanks for you isn't very effective because I didn't know what the blanks should be. So like,
that's interesting.
Yeah, like I had basically written like a Mad Lib and asked him to like fill in the blanks, but the whole thing that I had made wasn't that interesting. Yeah, he came up with essentially like what he came up with was the world and the backstory and all that kind of stuff. He would go like super deep on these things, like the calendar system they mentioned. And yeah, so he made all that stuff, and then he did some kind of like little bit of the beginning stuff. Like, he wrote out the first boss that you fight in the game. But being that he's kind of like, he has a lot of projects, so like he didn't really have time to like work on the entire game, which was shaping up to be bigger than we expected.
Yeah.
So that was when we brought on the second writer, who was this friend of mine, Jeff, who he's a guy that I do game jams with every year. We do the global game jam together, and he's a designer by trade, but he'd mentioned that he was interested in doing writing for the game, if it ever was desired. And so I hit him up and asked him if he'd be interested in working with Don on this, and we did some like intro meetings, and they kind of like, Don like kind of filled him in on how the world works and stuff like that in the game. And then Jeff started going off making stuff, and then he just came back with like all this cool stuff, like here's these different factions that exist in the world, and like here's like kind of like a fleshed out version of like what's going on with this sort of mysterious dead rock substance in the world, and kind of like, yeah, more info on the backstory, and like all this dialogue for like the intro that happens where this North Star is talking to you.
Yeah, which I mean, it's only a little piece there in the beginning. Does the North Star come back? Because
there's more to do with it. Yeah.
Okay, because that's such a core part. I mean, it's such a an anchoring metaphor for one, and it's such a core part of like the sailing experience. That I thought that was brilliant to sort of.
interesting thing about the game, because this is one of the challenges that we had to kind of work with, is because of kind of my method of like making this toy and like making the game and then being like, oh, okay, I guess I need writing now. Like there was kind of an already working game made when we started doing story. And so we kind of had to like design the story around the game to a large degree. And one of the things in the game is that there wasn't really like one character that you are. Like you have like kind of this rotating cast of crew on your boat, and no one is permanent. And there's no like single face that you can tie to you, the player. You have like different boats in your fleet. Some of them might sink, then you get other boats. There's no way of being sure that like any of the crew members will be consistent between them. And so we were kind of like trying to answer this question of like who are you then? Like what is the player's identity? And I think Don came up with this idea of like you are the spirit of adventure, and you're kind of like you're essentially embodying these sailors, and kind of like guiding them. And so it's like a loose group of sailors that you're guiding, but like they're all being guided by like this one sort of like unifying spirit. And that's
Interesting.
like kind of like the thought behind this intro, where the North Star is talking to you. It's talking to you, the player, who is the spirit of adventure. And then like you kind of go and like find a sailor to like help.
That's interesting. I didn't catch that completely. Uh, but
Yeah,
now
it's
it's making
not
a lot
like
of yeah, yeah, and it doesn't need to be sort of super explicit. Like, hey, you are you are the spirit of adventure.
right.
You need to think about these things this way. That would sort of spoil it, and it's not really critical that the player internalizes
Right.
that either,
Yeah.
because
This is
you're playing with the toy and
yeah,
you're
yeah.
having the adventure and you're building up your fleet, and then you're getting it, as I'm sure you're sort of like getting it by the end, because you've got this fleet and you got the different boats and you go do things.
Yeah, it's the kind
Um,
of thing that kind of helps us while we're making the game, like kind of think about how other characters would talk to you, and like just what the player's role in the narrative is. It was like kind of a useful tool to consider. But yeah, so that's essentially how the writing went. Like we hired Jeff on. He wrote all this dialogue, like just pages and pages and pages of stuff. An interesting thing about that was that I didn't have like any kind of systems ready to turn all this into quests. Like I didn't come to Jeff and I was like, here's like the types of quests that I have. Here's like
right.
the exact mechanisms that you can invoke in your scripts. It was kind of all up up for grabs, like
Did
anything
his
goes kind of. So he wrote a whole bunch of stuff.
did his dialogue inspire how any of the quests came out?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. He actually in his writing essentially like designed some of the like quest systems. Like
Mhm.
he would say like he came up with these factions. There's like these light keepers who like are the inhabitants of these spooky lighthouses. And so like to pair with them, he like came up with all these sort of different systems that you could do, like ways you can interact with them and like types of quests that they would give. And so I would take that and like implement it, and we'd iterate back and forth on like how some of the systems worked. And sometimes like there'd be things that were in the game already that he didn't know about, and so like
Yeah.
it would be like, oh, like I could take this idea that you had and like adapt it to work with this existing thing in the game. Yeah, so it was a fun process. It was very very like organic the way it evolved.
I think that's something that other people who are thinking about this kind of project could take away, is getting that interaction between like the developers and the designers, or the game architect versus the narrative team, and or marketing and engineering in any discipline. You start to get the interaction and the iteration and the collaboration between those, and going around and around and around, and expect that you're going to do that. That's when you start to get some really interesting things happen, because the like you might get somebody that has a really creative idea and doesn't know if it's possible. And doesn't even know what the tools are that they have to sort of like realize a creative idea, and vice versa. You get people who are great at creating tools and systems, and they don't know where why would I, or where do I need to wrap a tool or a system or a toy around. Yeah, so that sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
One of the things that struck me when I was playing the game also was, and I know you've got some detail around this, there's no voice acting, which is a big, well, kind of no voice acting. Which is a big benefit because that's super expensive and involved, and you've got like producers and directors and that kind of thing, and could cost more than the whole game costs.
Oh yeah.
So would describe what you did and what's going on there with sort of when the characters do talk, which I thought was super clever and
Yeah.
worked.
Yeah, what I did, I was inspired kind of by two games actually, by like Animal Crossing is one, and then another one is Banjo-Kazooie. I think Banjo-Kazooie is what I was thinking of initially, and then I realized that Animal Crossing is even more similar. But what I did is, well, in Banjo-Kazooie, I'll just say first, like that when you talk, like every character kind of has like there's this little like repeating audio clip that they do that just kind of is like a cartoony sound of like what that character might sound like while they're talking. Like Banjo's just like while their dialogue is playing, and like every character has a super like fun sound to them. And so I was trying to make something kind of like that, and like I wanted it to be something that wouldn't cost a lot of dev resources for every character, and it had to be something that I didn't have to like set up manually for every like dialogue line or something like that. And so what I came up with was just the simplest thing I could think of, which was record myself saying the alphabet. And I would say the letters pretty quick. Like I'd be like, ah, b, s, d, b. And I wouldn't say the letters out loud because I discovered that kind of made it sound weird. But I would kind of say each letter of the alphabet the way you'd pronounce it in the middle of a word or something. And then I'd cut that up into samples, one sample for each letter, and then play it back as a character is speaking their dialogue as the text is being displayed. Just play back that sound, and then I played around with the speed that it gets typed out and stuff like that to make it sound more natural. And I added some like volume and pitch modulation on like a curve based on like where it is in the middle of the word. So like
Yeah.
like a little bit of like pitch because it sounded very monotone at first, and then I figured out like, oh, like you could make it so like for a sentence you have like a curve of pitch modulation that happens across the sentence and stuff
Right.
like that. But that's just like extra little details to make it feel good. But really it's just play a sound for every letter, and it's a consistent sound. So that means that like them saying that sounds the same every time. So it kind of sounds like a language. And even sometimes every now and then you'll hear like an English word here and there because like the pronunciations just happen to work out to
Right.
where it actually sounds like the phonetics of the word.
Right, because the letters are sort of the core.
That sounds so fun to me. Yeah.
It was very fun. And like kind of like we were talking about before, like I was able to like work with a bunch of my friends, and this is like such a simple, low cost way to like be able to or low barrier of entry, I should say, way for like other people to contribute to the game, because I could just
Right.
have my friends come over and be like, "Hey, do you want to have your voice in the game? Like, here, let me hit record. Just say the alphabet," and they'd be like, what do I need to like? How should I do it? And I was just like, pretty much anything goes. Like, it's very
Yeah.
flexible. Like, you don't even really have to like make sounds that are that close to the letters because they don't need to like sound like the word. And so people had a lot of fun with it, and it was fun to like get my friends involved that way.
That's super cool. Getting friends involved, making other people feel like they're part of it. That's almost like a gift. I would love to like be part of that thing.
Yeah.
Every once it's only happened a couple times, but people have asked me to do like a voice clip for their podcast. You know, could you say this thing? Either like say the thing about the voice cast. Somebody had me do in the voice of a Jedi, you know, say the Jedi code or something. And it was, I don't know why, it was just amazing to sort of be included in that way. That felt really good.
Yeah.
The system, I think, was brilliant. And it reminds me of Simlish in The Sims.
Oh yeah, totally.
Which again, it makes it an opportunity to have the characters in the game sort of come to life when that dialogue is happening. But it's not voice acting, which is its own really big can of worms. So I think that was super clever. And I know you sort of downplayed it, but what you just started talking about, I think, again, from a design from a creation perspective, is something that people underestimate the value of, which is tweaking and adding layers and layers and creating something interesting by modulating it. So you had the letters. So then you played with the velocity of the typing. So that's one layer. Then you played with the pitch and the pitch as it relates to the sentence, and you ended up creating an automated system. But each layer you sort of add onto it, it
Yeah.
increases the richness and creates something really powerful and new, and art, instead of just a mechanical thing that just sort of gets spit out. That's fascinating.
That's the way I think a lot of the systems in this game ended up as, I think, partially a side effect of it just being me like working on it on my free time for the first 4 years. Like I would like sit down and be like, what am I going to do today? Like maybe I'll just noodle some more on the dialogue
Yeah.
voices, or maybe I'll like tweak the water some more. And like you just end up with a lot of layers of
Right.
of I don't know, complexity or
Richness.
yeah, just a lot of like stuff happening with them.
Which is a double-edged sword, though, too. I mean, at some point you need to ship it. So
Yeah.
you do need to stop tweaking it at some point, which can be hard, especially
It is
for
hard.
an artist, for a creator, because
Yeah.
you're never completely satisfied. I
Never
would
feels
imagine.
done.
Now,
Still doesn't feel done.
you back up one. Maybe we'll just talk for a couple minutes. You back up a little bit further. You worked at Microsoft. I worked at Microsoft for 13 years, but way before you even started at Microsoft, I left. You worked on HoloLens, but Microsoft was a place where you shipped things. So
Yeah.
did you get
Well,
and you were supposed to be shipping things.
yeah, maybe not where I was.
unless your project was canceled. But yeah, so you worked in an interesting space with some of the HoloLens stuff, right?
Hmm.
I had done HoloLens post my Microsoft years when I was working at Accenture, Avanade. I had done HoloLens development, so that was all Unity based. So is that where you got sort of like the core of your? Did you learn Unity then, or did you know Unity before getting into the HoloLens group? Or
I had started I just barely started pretty much like messing around with Unity when I joined this HoloLens team. I think I joined them in like middle of 2014 or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think I had done one game jam using Unity, and I kind of like understood a little bit about it. And then I started working on this team, and then so that was around the same time, or a little like a year later, I started working on the game. And so while I was learning Unity on this team and like ramping up on it and like learning all these like cool tricks on it from people who were more of an expert at it than me, it was like this really great back and forth, because then I'd go home and work on my game and apply those things and also learn more things
Right.
just in the process of trying to get stuff to work in my game. And then I would come back to work and like apply those to my work and like show other people that stuff. And yeah, it was like this great like symbiotic relationship between my side project and my day job.
the interaction with other people who are doing things and know tricks, I think, is really important. Game jams, I think, is a great way to go about doing that too. To be working with other people, they could show you things, you show them things. It also though makes me think about some of the difference I feel like so far, and I know it's not necessarily it's not an axiom. Doesn't have to be true, but the difference between Unity and Unreal. I feel like in
Mhm.
Unity, there's a lot more like engineering, and you got to like create things from scratch. And the community has also, you can get you get like the plugins and stuff that like people have done, and there's a lot more code going on as
Yeah.
opposed to Unreal, which like the blueprints and the scripting that goes on in Unreal is a little bit different. Now you can do a bunch of coding in Unreal as well, and you can get a bunch of preformed assets for Unity. But I still feel like at the core, when you first start using them, Unity is about coding and Unreal is about scripting, and that I don't think that's bad
Yeah,
or
for sure.
good on either side. I think there's pros and cons.
I think
Um,
that is what appeals to me about Unity. Like, I guess cards on the table, I have not tried Unreal, but I get the sense that this is true. And what I like about Unity is that it feels like this kind of sandbox where like they give you like kind of the primitives, and then you can just kind of construct whatever kind of development environment you want within there. In
Yeah.
Sailforth, like I used a lot of my own custom stuff. I didn't use Unity's lighting. I didn't use their like shaders. I didn't since it's all boat physics. Like I barely used their physics. Like I used the
Interesting.
most basic form of their physics, just like collisions and collision responses. But all the buoyancy and like they don't have like an out of the box boat physics thing. So like that's all custom.
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
the
Unless some
sky,
third party does out there that you would like
yeah,
download and input or something.
like the sky and the weather, all that stuff. Like it's all none of that is like something that Unity provides, and I really like that because I think that I don't know, it's fun to like you can make something that feels really unique that way, and it's fun as a from a development standpoint too because I like creating this little world that I live in as a developer of like all my own sort of systems to work with.
Thinking about that, this is a good segue. Talking about development on the HoloLens and Unity. We always like to finish up by talking about the future. I love talking about the HoloLens in general. It's a very exciting time to think about that right now with Meta. And in theory, potentially, I've seen some rumors and headlines that Apple may come out with a mixed reality headset. And I think Valve's got their brand new headset. But Meta with the mixed reality headset and Apple with a mixed reality headset. Just so everybody knows, here's what's going to happen. Those two are going to come out and they're going to invent this new space of mixed reality headsets that Microsoft invented almost a decade ago.
Yeah.
I've got sitting back here my tablet PC that Microsoft put out. You know, it's tablet format and it's got a pen and you can write on it. And then about 6 years later, Apple invented tablet computing.
Yeah.
Which when I
Funny
worked
how that worked.
when I worked at Microsoft at the time, that was kind of crazy. But anyway, with that in mind, and especially since Unity is part of the platform, have you thought about like porting Sailforth to VR or headsets
man.
or just what is your view of the future at all? Just to kick it off.
Well, for as far as Sailforth on VR goes, I've seen people ask about that a couple times, and usually what I think is just like it's already a game on the ocean where you're a boat, like, and the camera is kind of like I do some
Mhm.
stuff to make it like wavy in the ocean to feel nice. So it's
Yeah.
already like this seasickness risk.
Yeah,
Like
right.
if you're in VR on this boat, it's gonna be pretty rough, I think. But maybe, I could see it being as kind of like a diorama kind of VR experience.
Right.
You're
Which
looking
there
down
are
at the
some
boat.
clever the VR space is a really interesting point because there isn't a lot of user interface and affordances and sort of dictionary of how games interfaces should work. We
Yeah.
talked to Rotu this year, which is doing some really interesting things with hands first VR and the way
Mhm.
you can sort of like create ways to like move yourself in the world.
Yeah.
There are a couple really interesting sort of orthographic diorama control your little fleet or team or boat from
Yeah.
like a
I could see it working like Moss, maybe, which is a great.
like a god
I
mode
like the way that they did their
perspective.
stuff.
Yeah, that could be really interesting. But it wouldn't be first on my list of what to do with Sailforth. I think it works really great. As I said, I think it works really great on the deck and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where do you see the future of like your studio and Sailforth? You know, what are your plans for like the next 5 years, 10 years? What is
Oh man.
what do you think things are going to look like for you?
I'm definitely gonna make some more games. I think that's pretty definitely. Exactly what they are, I don't know. I do know what I like making, which is seems to be based on my history so far. I've made a bicycle game and a boat game. So vehicles are a trend.
Yeah.
And I think that the reason for that is just that vehicles are fun to control. Like everyone has had probably like a remote control car or like boat or something like that
Yeah.
at some point in their lives, and they're just fun. Like it's fun like manipulating them, and like they have lots of different controls that you can use, and like they move in ways that are different from how we're used to moving around. And so it's fun to just like do stuff with them. And
Have
so
you
I could imagine
experimented with other vehicles? Like, what do you have in mind?
I mean, space games is one that I've
Ooh.
always been into. Like that was kind of like how I started making games. Was I had like some dream space game that I wanted to make that I have never really quite executed on. I think I've tried to make that like 6 or 7 times throughout my life. When I was very young though, and like I had just nowhere near the chops to be able to do it. So that's an option, or like I don't know, submarines I thought of, or like
I thought of
buy
hang gliders.
hang gliders would be cool, or like one of that I saw recently was seaplanes. But there is actually a pretty cool looking seaplane game coming out called Brew Barons. And it looks like they've done largely what I would want to do. So like that one might be good enough. Like I think that one's been covered.
Interesting space. And I think you're right that it's a really fun toy, again, at the core of a game. And
Exactly.
there's a game that's starting to get really hot right now, which is one of the Hot Wheels racing games. I think a new version of
Oh,
a Hot Wheels racing game came out. And it's takes the true idea of a toy and gives really fun controls on top of it. And then the racetracks that you're racing on are they're like a little Hot Wheel. You're like in a giant living room. And
yeah,
there's like a giant couch next to you, but your racetrack is the little Hot Wheels racetrack. And
that's pretty cool. That's
yeah,
something you don't. I'm surprised actually that we don't see more of stuff like that, like Hot Wheels making the digital version of Hot Wheels that for you to play with.
right, right.
That
That
does sound
connection between
quite fun.
the controls, the digital feel of that toy, I think maybe isn't something that the design capabilities of what they do with the physical design of the toy maybe doesn't map as well.
Sure,
So I could see that.
in VR, you could have a lot of fun with Hot Wheels or something
Right,
like that.
get inside your little Hot Wheels car and
Yeah,
look around and drive it around. That would be fun. Another one that came to mind, which I'm really surprised just because of the controls and like a device like this, it makes me think of in a regular controller drones. So
mm,
you use like even a lot of the professional drones, you use this kind of device to control a drone, like
yeah.
the high end racing drones. I'm surprised there isn't already, and maybe there are. Maybe I just haven't researched them, but like a whole genre of drone games.
I've seen some, I think. Though I think that similar to what we were talking about before, I saw a couple of like drone racing games and stuff like
Okay,
that. But like it didn't look based on the footage I saw, it didn't excite like it didn't look like flying it was gonna feel that good. Like it didn't
yeah,
seem like feel super tactile, I guess.
right. You're already kind of disconnected. I wonder, yeah, how that would work. Um, but yeah, I love the idea of you carving, sort of having a genre. And I think that's really a fun and interesting thing for a studio so that people kind of know what to expect and they can sort of become fans and, like and subscribe to that kind of stuff
Yeah.
and be there long term and wait for the next kind of like vector thing
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
comes out. I think that's brilliant.
That's kind of
Um,
like I'm sort of retroactively applying this meaning to the name, but like the name Festive Vector, like which was really just a word that popped in my head when I was staying up at night trying to think of a name that I could release this under. I feel like it kind of describes like this idea of like the combination of like fun with like math, and that's kind of like how the boats work in the game. Like it's like some math and stuff to make them behave the way they do, and like that creates the fun.
yep.
Uh, so I like that about the name.
Yeah, the math angle, there's velocity you could comes to mind, and also a destination.
Yeah, yeah,
I
exactly.
really like that as part of it too. All right, well this has been amazing. I love talking about kind of like the philosophy and the concepts, and I think you've given us a really cool new one to really add to the bag of best practices out there in the games industry. That idea of the toy at the core really
Yeah,
sort of solidified that for me. So
awesome.
I'm a fan. Well, I'll be watching Festive Vector. I
Thank
can't
you.
wait to see what comes next and continue to on my journey and adventure in Sail Forth. As I said, I love that kind of game just to have on the Steam Deck. So when I'm like laying in bed and just goofing off or just want to sit on the couch and not be at the PC, even though I'm a PC gamer at core and I can play this on the PC, it's like the perfect game for that. So thank you for that. And
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll certainly stay connected to see what's next because it's an exciting space and it's brilliant work. So I know it's going to be good.
Yeah, this was really fun. Thank you.
Yeah,
This
thank you for
sounds great.
coming.
All right. We will talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Yep. Thank you. Bye-bye.
This has been a New Overlords production. For more, please visit newoverlords.com for video, subscribe and feed links, and other ways to help the show.